In the vast expanse of the universe, beyond the reaches of human understanding, there exists a place where even the brightest stars are swallowed by darkness. Place where the coldness of space is not the greatest threat, but the emptiness that lives in the hearts of those trapped within it. This is where the story begins, not with a bang, but with the silence that echoes in the deepest corners of existence. Far from Earth, in an isolated world that had long been abandoned, there was a being trapped in a prison of her own making. Though she hadn't chosen it, she was no ordinary being. She wasn't human. But that did not make her any less alive, any less capable of feeling the weight of her own existence pressing down on her. For what felt like an eternity, she had wandered through a land of sorrow and desolation, broken by the endless cycle of solitude. Every corner of her world, every shadow, seemed to remind her of the choices that had led her to this painful, unending place. And it wasn't just the physical isolation that tormented her. It was the realization that there would be no escape. Her days had blended into nights, time losing all meaning. She couldn't remember how many cycles had passed since she first found herself here. There were no stars to wish upon, no comforting voices to break the silence, only the sound of her own thoughts. She had once been part of something much bigger, something that spanned galaxies. Yet now, she was nothing more than a forgotten relic of a forgotten past. The world she had once inhabited was lost, its memory fading in the cold winds that swept through the barren land. She had tried to fight back. At first she had resisted, struggling to find a way out of her endless confinement. She tried everything, every strategy, every method that came to mind, but it was all in vain. The walls of her prison were invisible, but they were stronger than any material she had ever encountered. They were made of a force far more powerful than any weapon she knew of. Hope seemed like a distant dream, one that grew fainter with every passing moment. She began to accept the inevitability of her fate, until the very idea of escape seemed almost foolish. But then, one day, something changed. A whisper in the air. A disturbance in the stillness that had suffocated her for so long. For the first time in what felt like forever, something outside of herself had made its presence known. A distant vibration, the hum of something foreign. She had learned to ignore the small disturbances in the past, thinking they were just figments of her imagination, tricks played by a mind on the brink of despair. But this felt different. It felt real. Her pulse quickened. Someone was coming. The surge of hope, long forgotten, flared within her. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to make her wonder if there could truly be a way out. She stood still for a moment, listening, waiting for the next sign. The hum grew louder, its source becoming clearer. It was unmistakable now. Someone was approaching, something human. The realization hit her like a shockwave. A human. She had heard stories of humans, beings from a distant world, known for their resilience and adaptability. Yet, she had never expected one to find her. They were not supposed to be out here. They did not belong to the realm she now existed in. But here in this dark, forsaken corner of the universe, a human was approaching. Her mind raced. How had they found her? What did this mean for her future? Could this be the moment she had been waiting for, the moment that would break the cycle of misery she had come to accept as her fate? With each step of the human, the tension in the air thickened. The closer they came, the more she could feel the weight of destiny pressing down upon her. It wasn't just about her escape. It wasn't just about her freedom. This moment would change everything. This was no longer just her story. As the human drew nearer, the reality of what was happening began to sink in. What did a human, with their limited understanding of the universe, hope to achieve in this place? What did they think they could do? It had been so long since anyone had dared to venture into these forsaken lands. And yet, here they were, walking straight into the unknown, just as she had once done, long ago. But unlike her, they had no idea what they were about to face. For a fleeting moment, She considered hiding, staying hidden in the shadows where she had spent countless years. After all, what could she possibly gain by revealing herself to someone who didn't understand her world? But then, just as quickly, the thought passed. Maybe she didn't want to hide anymore. Maybe it was time for something to change. The human stopped just within sight, the pale light of distant stars illuminating their face, their features unreadable. For a moment, they simply stood there, as if sensing the enormity of the moment. She could feel their presence like a magnetic pull, a force that seemed to reach deep into her being, awakening something that had long been dormant. And then, a voice, quiet but strong, pierced the silence. "Are you real?" It was the first time anyone had spoken to her in so long, the first time she had heard a voice that wasn't her own or the hollow echoes of her past. She didn't know how to respond. She didn't even know if she could. The question hung in the air, unanswered. Would she step out from the shadows? Would she trust this human, who seemed so fragile yet so full of determination, to help her find a new beginning? Or would she retreat back into the safety of her isolation, convinced that nothing could ever change? The human took a cautious step forward, their eyes scanning the dark terrain, still unsure of what they had encountered. They seemed to hesitate for a moment, as if sensing the uncertainty that lay within her. But the choice was hers to make. The path ahead was uncertain, and the danger of what lay beyond this encounter was just as unknown. But for the first time in what seemed like forever, the possibility of change hung in the air like a fragile thread. The silence stretched, heavy with the weight of what could come next. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, the human spoke again. "I won't leave you here alone." Could this stranger, this human, truly offer her a new beginning? Or would they become just another fleeting moment in a universe filled with shadows? The story was far from over, and the tension was palpable. One thing was certain: this encounter would be the spark that set everything into motion. Where it would lead, she had no idea. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she wasn't alone. The human's voice had barely broken through the stillness, but it had already planted a seed of doubt in her mind. Could she trust this person? Could she trust anyone? Her life, if it could even be called that, had been one of isolation, filled with too many years of solitude. And now, after all this time, a stranger appeared, offering something she wasn't sure she was ready to accept. A chance for something different, something new. But could this human be different from the others who had passed through her life, leaving only scars behind? Or would they, too, fade away into the abyss like so many before them? For a long moment, she remained silent, her body stiff, her mind struggling with the choice laid before her. Every instinct screamed at her to turn away, to vanish into the shadows where she had lived so long. The idea of opening herself up to someone else, of letting another soul into her world, felt foreign. The pain of the past had created walls, high and unyielding. She had long ago built her fortress, brick by brick, to protect herself from the agony of hope, only to see it crumble under the weight of disappointment. But the human's words lingered, echoing in her thoughts. "He won't leave you alone." Asterisk. Could she believe that? Could she believe in something so simple, something so pure, after everything she had endured? A new beginning. Was that even possible? Or was it just another lie that the universe fed to those desperate enough to believe? The human stood motionless for a few more moments, eyes scanning the barren landscape, looking for any sign of movement. She could see them hesitate, their uncertainty mirroring her own. There was no denying the tension that hung in the air. They didn't know what to expect, just as she didn't know how to react. And yet, there was something in their stance, something almost familiar. Quiet strength, an unspoken promise that perhaps, just perhaps, they might be different. She took a breath, slow and deliberate. Maybe, just maybe. In a barely audible whisper, she spoke. You shouldn't be here." Her voice felt strange, foreign even, after so many years of silence. It cracked with the weight of 1,000 unspoken words, the years of her existence buried deep inside her. But she had to say something. She had to let the human know. This place, this world, wasn't for them. It wasn't a place where they could simply come and go. It wasn't a place that offered redemption or salvation. It only offered despair. And she knew that better than anyone. The human's gaze flickered to the ground, as if considering her words carefully. "I don't care. I'm not leaving." Her heart skipped a beat. There was no fear in their voice, no hesitation, just a quiet certainty. She didn't know what to make of it. Humans, at least the ones she'd heard of, weren't supposed to be like this. They were meant to be fragile, fleeting things, swept away by the storms of the universe. And yet here was one, standing tall in the face of the unknown, refusing to back down. For a moment, she simply watched them, her mind racing. What did they want? What could they possibly want with her? Was this all part of some grand design, or was it just another random twist of fate? And why did it matter so much to her? She could feel the weight of her own thoughts pushing her down, the need to retreat into the safety of her isolation tugging at her. But something in her, something deep within her, felt a flicker of something else. Curiosity. And need for change. Maybe it was the smallest seed of hope she hadn't known was still alive. But it was there. Her eyes narrowed, and she took a tentative step forward, the sound of her movement almost deafening in the silence. "Why are you here?" The human didn't move at first, their face still obscured by the shadows of the vast, empty land around them. But she could see the faint outline of their eyes, the soft glow of the stars catching their features. There was a strength in those eyes, but also something she hadn't expected. Empathy. A quiet understanding that seemed to reach beyond the physical, beyond the words they spoke. They didn't look at her as a puzzle to be solved or an enigma to be unlocked. They simply looked at her, as if they saw something in her that she had forgotten to see in herself. "I'm here because I have to be," they said softly. "I don't know why, but I can't leave without knowing that you're okay." Her heart twisted at their words, but she didn't show it. How could they be so sure? So certain that they could help her? After all, they didn't even know who or what she was. They didn't know the truth of her existence, the way her life had been shaped by forces far beyond her control. They didn't know the weight of the chains she wore, chains that extended far beyond the physical. They couldn't. How could they? And yet, there was a part of her, a small, fragile part, that wanted to believe. "No one has ever helped me," she said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain composed. "No one has ever cared." The human's eyes softened, and they took a step closer. "Maybe that's because they didn't understand. But I do. I know what it's like to feel lost, to feel like there's no way out. But that doesn't mean it has to stay that way." Her breath caught in her throat. Cold it really be that simple? The human's words were gentle, but there was an undeniable strength in them. Strength born not of power or might, but of something far more rare, compassion. It was something she had forgotten the taste of, something she thought she would never experience again. And yet, standing in front of her, here in this desolate place, this human seemed to offer it to her without question. For the first time in a long while, the walls she had built around herself began to crack. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The smallest sliver of a possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could allow herself to hope again. But as quickly as the thought came, doubt followed. What if this was just another trick? What if this human was just like all the others, here to make empty promises, only to disappear when things got too difficult? What if they were no different from the ones who had come before them, people who claimed to care but left as soon as the world grew too dark? Her mind spun with these questions, each one spinning faster than the last. And yet, even in the midst of her uncertainty, she found herself unwilling to turn away. She was tired, tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. "I don't know what you expect from me," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging within her. "But I can't promise anything. I can't promise that I'll change. I can't promise that I'll let you in." The human nodded, as if they had expected nothing more. "I don't need promises," they said. "I just need you to trust that I'm here, that I won't leave, not until you're ready." Her heart skipped a beat, and she looked at them, truly looked at them for the first time. There was no fear in their eyes, no expectation of anything from her. They weren't demanding anything, just offering what they could. It wasn't much, but it was more than she had been given, in what felt like forever. The silence stretched between them again, but it wasn't as heavy this time. There was something lighter in the air, something more hopeful. Still, she couldn't shake the nagging doubt in the back of her mind. Was this real? Could she trust this human? Could they really help her escape the shadows that had clung to her for so long? But just as she was about to pull back, to retreat into the safety of her isolation once more, the human spoke again. "I'm not asking you to trust me right away. I just want you to know that I'm here. And that's a start." And for the first time in a long time, she felt something stir within her. A small, fragile hope, delicate but powerful. A new beginning. Maybe this was the chance she had been waiting for. Or maybe it was just another false hope. Only one way to find out. But the question still lingered in the air, unanswered, as the human stepped closer. What would happen next? Would this truly be her escape? Or would it be yet another false dawn, leading her into the darkness once again? The tension between them was palpable, heavy with the weight of the unknown. Neither one of them had the answers, but for the first time in years, it didn't matter. The human's steady gaze never wavered as they took another step closer, their presence oddly reassuring, yet unsettling at the same time. It felt as if time itself was bending around them, a slow, unyielding pull drawing everything toward some inevitable outcome. She felt the weight of that pull, the gravity of their unspoken promise, pressing against her chest. Yet, doubt still clung to her like a shadow that refused to dissipate, gnawing at her thoughts. "You don't understand," she whispered, barely audible, as though speaking too loudly would shatter the fragile thread between them. "I have lived in darkness for so long. It's all I know. How can anyone, expect me to believe that things can change?" The human's expression softened, but there was no pity in their eyes. They weren't looking at her with the typical mixture of sympathy and distance that she had grown accustomed to. Instead, there was something else. Deep, quiet understanding that cut through the years of isolation she had lived through. For the first time, someone seemed to truly see her, not as a puzzle to be solved or a burden to bear, but as someone capable of more than just surviving. Someone capable of healing. "I don't expect you to believe," the human said. "Not right away, but I'm not asking you to change. I'm just asking you to take a step, to trust that there's a way out of the darkness, even if you can't see it yet." Her heart clenched at their words. Take a step. It seemed so simple, so innocuous, but it felt like standing on the edge of a precipice, unsure if the ground would hold or if she would fall into the unknown. She wanted to trust them. Part of her longed to trust them, but the scars of her past were deep, and every time she had let herself hope, she had been left alone in the cold again. The universe had a way of crushing dreams, of snuffing out light before it had a chance to burn brightly. The silence between them stretched again, but this time it was filled with a tension that felt almost suffocating. She could feel the weight of their gaze, the weight of their belief in her, and it made her uneasy. Why did they care so much? What did they hope to accomplish by staying? They had no idea what they were dealing with, no idea of the forces she had been up against. no idea of the darkness that had been her companion for so long. Then, the ground beneath them shuddered. The tremor was barely noticeable at first, a ripple in the air, like a distant warning. But then it came again, stronger this time, a violent shake that sent dust swirling into the air. She staggered, her hand instinctively reaching for something to steady herself. But there was nothing but the barren earth beneath her feet. The human's expression shifted instantly, eyes scanning the horizon, alert. "What was that?" the human asked, their voice sharp with concern. The question echoed in her mind, but she didn't answer right away. She knew. She didn't need to say it aloud. Something was coming. Something that had been dormant for so long. Something far more powerful than either of them could comprehend. The world she had been trapped in was shifting, responding to their presence, to her hesitation, to this fragile moment of hope. She took a step back, her instincts screaming at her to retreat. But where could she go? There was nowhere to run, no place to hide. She could feel the presence closing in, a malignant force that had been waiting for just this moment. She had lived in its shadow for so long that it knew her as well as she knew herself. The very air around her seemed to pulse with its arrival, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The human, sensing her growing fear, took a step toward her, their expression now full of determination. "We need to move, now." It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. But as she looked into their eyes, she saw something unexpected, something fierce, something that matched the storm brewing around them. For the first time, she saw not just a stranger, but an ally, someone willing to stand with her against whatever force was coming. But even with that newfound strength, doubt still gnawed at her. Could they really face this together? Could they survive whatever was about to happen? The ground shook again, this time with more force. The air was heavy with the hum of something unseen, something far beyond their understanding. And then she saw it, barely visible against the horizon, a shadow moving with unnatural speed. It was massive, looming, a dark mass of something that didn't belong in this world. The very sky seemed to darken as it approached, as if the stars themselves were retreating from its presence. Her breath caught in her throat. The creature that had haunted her for so long, the force that had kept her imprisoned here, was now awake. It had sensed them. It had sensed her. "There's nowhere to hide," she said, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes locked on the approaching threat. "It's too late." The human turned to her, their face hardening. "We don't hide. We fight." Her pulse quickened. Fight. She hadn't fought in so long. She had only survived, and even that had seemed impossible at times. She had no weapons, no means of defense. What could she possibly do against a force like this? How could anyone hope to fight something so vast, so powerful? The human reached out, their hands steady despite the terror that she could feel radiating off of them. "I don't know what this is, but I'm not going down without trying. And neither are you." For a moment, she hesitated, torn between the instinct to flee and the possibility of standing and fighting. She had been running for so long, running from herself, from the shadows of her past, from the inevitable. But now, for the first time, she wasn't alone. The human's words echoed in her mind, and for a brief moment, the old instincts began to rise to the surface. The creature continued to draw closer, its form becoming more defined, a monstrous shape that seemed to absorb the light around it. The very ground trembled beneath its weight, and the air seemed to crackle with a palpable energy. It was here, and it wasn't leaving without a fight. "We can do this," the human said, their hand now outstretched toward her, a gesture of trust, a promise that she wasn't sure she could accept. But the look in their eyes was unwavering, filled with something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years, the possibility of victory. She looked at their hand, trembling with the weight of the choice before her. To trust, to step into the unknown, to fight. The darkness loomed closer, faster now, like a tidal wave about to crash. The ground cracked, the air crackled, and the sky seemed to pulse with an ancient power. She felt the fear creeping up her spine, the weight of her past pushing her back, urging her to retreat. But as she looked at the human, standing there with nothing but determination in their eyes, something stirred inside her. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to fight, to take that step. But as her hand moved toward theirs, a deafening roar split the air, shaking the very core of the earth beneath them. The creature was upon them, and the battle for her freedom, for their survival, was about to begin. The roar of the creature filled the air, a guttural sound that rattled the very earth beneath their feet. She felt the ground tremble with its approach, the vibrations traveling up through her legs, making every step feel like it could be her last. But even with the terrifying presence of the beast looming ever closer, something in her stirred, an unfamiliar sense of purpose. The human's hand was still outstretched, waiting, their gaze unwavering. She reached out, her fingers brushing against theirs. The moment her hand made contact with theirs, a shock of energy pulsed through her, almost like an electric current. It wasn't just the human's warmth, it was something more, something ancient. The force of it stunned her for a moment, and she almost pulled away, but the human held her tight. There was no hesitation now, no doubt in their eyes. They were ready, but was she? Before she could answer the question, the creature let out another roar, this time closer, louder. The sound seemed to shatter the very air, causing the skies to ripple with dark energy. Her mind raced. There was no escape, no time to plan. They were trapped, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the weight of her past, the fear that had chained her to this cursed land, began to loosen its grip. She wasn't alone. Just as the creature's massive shadow loomed over them, a sharp, sudden flash of light split the sky. For a brief moment, everything went silent. It wasn't the bright, blinding flash of a distant explosion or a celestial event. It was something entirely different. The light wasn't from the heavens or from any force she could identify. It seemed to be coming from inside the earth itself, as if the very ground was alive, a pulse deep within it calling out. She felt the vibrations of it deep within her chest, and the creature paused, its massive form quivering for a moment, caught in the light. "What is that?" she gasped, barely able to get the words out as she instinctively stepped closer to the human, who looked just as startled as she was. The human's eyes darted around, but they weren't afraid. They were scanning, calculating, trying to understand what was happening. "I don't know, but we need to keep moving." But before they could take another step, the ground beneath their feet cracked open with a violent force, sending both of them sprawling. The creature, the dark shadow that had been so close, staggered back, letting out an eerie howl as the very earth beneath them split open. She barely managed to catch herself on her hands, gasping as the shockwave reverberated through her bones. She could see the human doing the same, their eyes wide in disbelief. The ground was shifting, breaking apart like it was unraveling. And from deep within the fissure, a dark mist began to rise, swirling upward with a malevolent presence. Something was emerging from the earth. The creature, caught off guard by the sudden eruption, hesitated as the mist began to take shape. It wasn't the only threat now. The very land that had once been her prison seemed to be awakening, and whatever force was now emerging from the depths, it was not a friend. The mist solidified, taking a form she couldn't entirely comprehend, dark, shifting, and filled with a haunting energy. It wasn't just a creature. It was something older, more ancient, with an intelligence far beyond what either she or the human could fathom. It felt like the land itself had been holding its breath, and now, at last, it was exhaling a force that had been trapped for millennia. The human didn't wait for it to fully materialize before they started pulling her away, moving toward the shadow of a nearby rock formation. "We need to get out of here," they shouted, urgency thick in their voice. But she was frozen. Her feet didn't want to move. Not out of fear, but something else, something deeper. The land was calling to her, as if it was reaching into her very soul, pulling her in. What is it? She thought, the question circling in her mind, consuming her. Why does this feel so familiar? The creature, the one they had been running from, seemed to sense the new threat too. It let out another guttural roar, but it wasn't just fear in its sound. There was an edge to it. Desperation, as if it too recognized the power rising from the earth. The creature wasn't just hunting them. It was running from something much worse. In the distance, the air shimmered with that same unnatural energy, like the very fabric of the world was bending. The darkness swirling around the form rising from the earth seemed to stretch, expanding, like a black hole that consumed all light and hope. The land beneath them shifted again, this time with a sickening, grinding sound, as if something inside the planet was being torn apart. The human tugged at her again, this time with more force. Come on. They didn't look back, didn't wait for her to make a choice. They just pulled her toward the only shelter they could find. But it was futile. The land was shaking with such intensity now that even the rocks were being pulled into the air. Nothing was stable. Nothing was safe. The creature, now clearly visible, had turned its attention to the rising form of mist and shadow. The two forces, the one that had hunted her and the one that was awakening, seemed to be on a collision course, as if they had been drawn together by some unseen force. But she didn't have time to dwell on that, because something far more pressing caught her eye. The mist, the force rising from the earth, was shifting, condensing. And within it, she saw something familiar. A figure, standing tall, wrapped in shadows. Their presence was like a beacon in the chaos, their form almost human, but not quite. The figure was beckoning to her. Her heart skipped a beat. No, it can't be. But the realization hit her with such force that she almost stumbled. The figure, it wasn't just any stranger. It was her, or at least something that looked like her, something that mirrored her own form. But there was no warmth in it, no humanity, just cold, empty eyes that stared right through her. Do you see it? The human's voice was strained, their eyes wide with disbelief. What the hell is that? I don't know, she whispered, her voice shaking as she tried to make sense of what was happening. But there was no explanation. There was only this dark presence, this impossible figure from the shadows, reaching for her. The ground cracked again, and she felt it then. Deep, gut-wrenching pull, as if the earth itself was calling her to step forward. The dark figure's gaze locked onto hers, and for a moment, everything else faded into nothingness. She didn't care about the creature anymore. She didn't care about the human. All that mattered was the pull, the lure of the darkness that seemed to know her, that seemed to want her. The human grabbed her arm, their grip tight, their voice frantic. We have to go. Now. But it was too late. The ground beneath them exploded, and a wave of energy washed over her, dragging her toward the figure. 1,000 thoughts rushed through her mind in that moment, none of them coherent, all of them lost to the overwhelming sensation of being pulled toward something far more powerful than she could ever understand. And as the dark figure reached out for her, the world seemed to go black. The darkness consumed her, the pull of the figure growing stronger with each passing second. It was as if every fiber of her being was drawn toward it, a force so deep, so ancient, that it overshadowed everything she had ever known. The human's voice, once full of urgency, now sounded distant, as though muffled by the overwhelming power that surrounded her. She couldn't hear them anymore. All she could hear was the quiet hum of the earth beneath her feet and the rhythmic pulse of the figure's presence. Her body moved without her consent, her feet stepping closer to the figure, each movement slow and deliberate, like a sleepwalker drawn to their fate. The cold eyes of the figure burned into her soul, promising answers, offering understanding. She could feel the weight of it, the immense gravity of the force that had shaped her existence for so long. Then, just as her hand reached out to touch the figure, The human's voice broke through the thick fog of darkness, sharp and insistent. "Stop." The word was like a jolt of electricity, snapping her out of the trance she had been falling into. She froze, her hand hanging just inches from the figure. The world seemed to slow, the pulsing energy around her stilling for a brief, fragile moment. The human had caught up to her, their face pale, but their eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her heart beat faster. "You don't know what that is," they said, voice thick with urgency. "It's not you. It's never been you. This is a trap." Her mind reeled at their words. Trap. But it felt like her, felt like it was calling to her in a way nothing else ever had. It's me," she murmured, her voice shaking. "It's me." The humans shook their head, stepping closer, their hand gripping hers tightly. "No, that's not you. That thing is trying to take you. It's been waiting, feeding off your fears. It's pretending to be you, to use your past, your pain, to draw you in." The figure before her twisted, its form flickering, like smoke caught in a wind that it couldn't control. She watched in horror as it morphed, its eyes changing, no longer looking like hers, but something darker, something predatory. It was a monster, a parasite, and it had been manipulating her from the beginning. Everything began to fall into place. The flashes of memories, the voices in her head, the overwhelming sense that she had been tied to something sinister. It wasn't just the creature that had been hunting her. It was this dark presence, this shadow that had shaped her every step. She had been its prisoner, unknowingly walking right into its grasp. The earth beneath them trembled again, and the human yanked her away, pulling her back from the figure. Her heart was pounding now, her chest tight with a mix of fear and disbelief. How had she not seen it before? "We need to break its hold on you," the human said, their voice frantic. "It feeds off you, off your fear, but if you can see it for what it is, if you can break free, it loses its power." She nodded, her mind spinning, her heart in a vice. It was a trap, a manipulation so deep that she had almost willingly walked into it. The human was right. It wasn't her. It was something else, something ancient, something that had been lying in wait. The figure howled in rage, its form flickering violently as if it were losing its grip on her. It reached out, tendrils of shadow twisting toward her, but she stepped back, her hand still clutched in the human's. It was weakening. She could feel it. The bond, the invisible thread between them, was unraveling, fraying with each passing second. The creature let out a roar so loud it shook the air itself, a sound of pure fury. It wasn't just trying to pull her in, it was trying to destroy her. The very ground split open again, and a burst of energy shot upward, a massive wave of force that sent them both flying backward. She landed hard, her breath knocked out of her, but she didn't stop. The human was already on their feet, pulling her up, urging her to run. The shadow of the creature was still there, looming, desperate. But now, she wasn't running from it. She was running toward something else, toward herself. The figure, that twisted reflection of her past, gave one last scream of rage before it began to collapse in on itself, unraveling like a dying star. It was a battle of wills now, the darkness against the light of her own understanding. And as the human pulled her further away, the last vestiges of the shadowy figure were sucked into the very earth from which it had emerged. And then it was gone. For a moment, there was only silence. The earth was still, the air heavy with the aftermath of their confrontation. She could feel the weight lifting from her shoulders, the oppressive darkness that had clouded her mind for so long finally breaking apart. She stood there, breathing heavily, not quite believing it. The human was still beside her, their grip firm, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. But the creature was gone. The trap was broken. But just as she thought the worst was behind them, a low rumbling sound filled the air. It wasn't from the creature. It was something else entirely, something deeper, more ominous. The ground beneath them began to crack once more, and in the distance, the skies above started to shift, darkening with unnatural speed. And then, the final twist hit. Out of the swirling darkness above them, a massive shape appeared. It was too large to be anything they had seen before, its silhouette taking form in the shifting clouds. Her heart stopped for a beat as the truth finally settled in. This wasn't over. What they had just fought wasn't the true enemy. It was only a piece of something much larger, much older, and much more powerful. It was then that she understood. The earth had been a prison for something far greater than the shadow she had just defeated. It had been a guard, a sentinel, holding something back. Something that, now that the darkness had been disturbed, was about to break free. And this time, there would be no running. The final, horrific realization hit her like a thunderclap. The real battle was just beginning. The sky above them darkened with unnatural speed, the once clear heavens now swirling with black clouds. The massive shape looming in the distance cast a long shadow, obscuring the light. Her breath caught in her throat as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. The earth beneath her feet trembled, as if the very ground were preparing for a conflict far beyond anything she had encountered before. The figure, once a mere shadow, was now unmistakable, a being of immense power, radiating an energy so intense that it nearly took her breath away. "Stay close," the human whispered, their voice steady, but there was an edge of desperation beneath it. "We can't face this alone." She nodded, heart pounding in her chest. They had just survived one nightmare, only to have another rise from the ashes. But this new threat was unlike anything they had ever imagined. The thing in the sky was a force of nature, an ancient power that had lain dormant, held in check by the very land beneath their feet. And now, it was waking up. The ground trembled again, this time more violently. The sky above them flashed with bursts of lightning, but there was no storm. The air crackled with energy, as if the atmosphere itself were charged with the impending doom. The creature, the true enemy, was coming. The human didn't wait. Without a word, they grabbed her hand again and began running, pulling her through the shattered landscape. She followed, adrenaline flooding her system, but her mind was racing. The memories, the visions of the dark figure, all of it, everything she had believed about herself, about her past, was unraveling. The thing she had thought was her reflection, the shadow she had felt connected to, was not her. It had been something feeding off her pain, her fear, a parasite disguised as her own darkness. And now, it had opened the door to something worse. "Where are we going?" she gasped, struggling to keep up as they dodged debris falling from the sky, the ground cracking beneath their feet. "To the core," the human said, their voice urgent. "We have to get to the source of the disturbance. That's where we can stop it." The words barely made sense to her, but she didn't have time to question them. The very earth they were standing on was being torn apart, and they had to keep moving, to keep running from the chaos that was closing in around them. The ground split open in front of them, massive rift yawning wide. From the depths of the rift, dark, inky mists poured forth, swirling around them like a living thing, hungry for their very souls. It was the darkness, the thing that had been awakened, the force that had been imprisoned for eons, waiting for the right moment to break free. They jumped over the rift, landing hard on the other side, but they didn't stop. They couldn't afford to. The human pulled her forward, guiding her toward a distant, glowing light that pierced the darkness. It was the only source of hope in a world that was crumbling. They reached the light just as the skies above them split open with a deafening crack. From the rift, a massive figure emerged, its form so vast it seemed to fill the horizon. It was an enormous, dark creature, its body wreathed in shadow, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Its presence was overwhelming, an ancient being of pure destruction. For a moment, everything stopped. The creature gazed down at them, its eyes burning into hers, and she felt a surge of fear. a sense of helplessness unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was as if this being could see into her very soul, and it didn't care. But then the humans stepped forward, placing themselves between her and the creature. They stood tall, unwavering, despite the terror that surrounded them. "We don't have to fight it," the human said, their voice steady, almost calm. "We just need to sever the connection." She blinked, confused. Sever the connection. She had no idea what they meant. How could they possibly stop something so powerful? But the human wasn't finished. "The creature's power is tied to the land. If we sever the link, if we break the bond between the earth and this being, it loses its power. The darkness will vanish, and the land will heal." It was a desperate plan. A long shot, but it was all they had. The human reached down, pulling a small device from their belt. It was a strange, intricate thing, covered in symbols she couldn't understand. Without hesitation, they began to activate it, pressing a sequence of buttons, muttering under their breath as they worked. The light from the device pulsed, growing brighter with each passing second. The creature, sensing the change, howled in rage, its massive form shifting and thrashing. "You have to do it now," the human shouted, not looking at her. "The device will create a pulse. If you can focus your energy, we can target the core. You have to direct it at the heart of the creature." Her heart raced as she stared at the device in the human's hand. They were asking her to do something she didn't understand, to reach into herself and summon a power she wasn't sure existed. But the desperation in their voice, the trust in their eyes, it gave her the strength to try. She closed her eyes, reaching deep within herself, searching for that connection to the earth, to the energy that had always felt so foreign and yet so familiar. And then she felt it, the pull, the dark presence that had haunted her, that had kept her bound to this place. It was still there, a heavy weight on her soul, but now it was weak, fading, like a shadow retreating from the light. She focused, drawing on everything she had left, every ounce of strength, every bit of will. And as she did, she felt the energy around her shift. It was like the land itself was responding to her, the air humming with power. The device in the human's hand flared brightly, sending a pulse of energy shooting toward the creature. The creature screeched in agony, its massive form writhing as the pulse hit it. The ground shook violently, the earth cracking open beneath them. But she didn't stop. She kept pushing, focusing, until she could feel the connection snapping, the bond between the creature and the land unraveling. With a final, deafening roar, the creature exploded in a burst of dark energy, the force sending shockwaves through the air. The skies cleared, the darkness receding as quickly as it had come. The land beneath their feet stopped shaking, and the air became still once more. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, the human turned to her, their face streaked with dirt and sweat, but their eyes filled with relief. "We did it," they said, a faint smile tugging at the corner of their mouth. She blinked, still processing what had just happened. "It's over." The human nodded, still holding the device in their hand. "It's over. The land is free. You're free." She felt it then, the weight lifting off her chest. The oppressive darkness that had once been her prison, her constant companion, was gone. For the first time in what felt like forever, she could breathe freely. The ground beneath them began to heal, cracks closing up, the land slowly returning to its natural state. The skies above cleared, the sun finally breaking through the clouds. They stood there for a long time, watching as the world around them began to heal. The war was over. The battle had been won. And though they didn't have all the answers, though they didn't know what the future held, they knew one thing for certain. They had fought for something worth saving. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light across the land, she turned to the human, her heart full of gratitude. They had been her salvation, her guide through the darkness. And now, together, they stood at the dawn of a new beginning. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, She felt ready to face whatever came next. Because no matter what happened, she wasn't alone anymore. And that, she realized, was the greatest victory of all.